With his body swathed in bandages, 18-year-old Scott Lynch was zapping aliens on a video game this afternoon. But just 2 months ago, Scott was fighting for his own life after receiving an electric shock on a Beaumont Street building site. Scott sustained burns to most of his body after hammering a nail into a 415-volt cable.
Oh, if I was going to survive. Didn't know there was that much pain, and I don't know. That's about it.
While Scott's on the road to recovery, the near electrocution is the centre of a tussle between the Building Workers Industrial Union and Shortland Electricity. Scott's employer at the time, Graham Berwick, says the Electricity Authority has told him he's to pay for the relaying of the cable. But the union asserts that considering the cable could have been laid in a safer position in the first place, it's outrageous that the contractor has to pay the bill.
I think our local power authority is a very sad case indeed, when, in our view, they behave in this irresponsible way, nearly kill a group of workers, then make no attempts to relay the cable safely, and then on top of that they give this group of workers, or are going to give them, a bill probably for many thousands of dollars.
Shortland Electricity has confirmed it's holding the contractor responsible for the repair costs, but the Electricity Authority says it operates under Australia's most stringent safety standards and it won't be bowing to any pressure to compromise those levels. Scott Bevan, NBN News.
"150 students make up the combined band. Later this week, they will join thousands of other students from the Hunter Valley and throughout the state for the extravaganza.
The Newcastle foreshore was one big informal party last New Year's Eve. Thousands charged their glasses to usher in 1991, but when they left, 6 truckloads of rubbish stayed behind. It was Council's responsibility to clean up the mess, and one Lord Mayor John McNaughton is keen to offload.
What's in it for the council is to save the enormous danger we had last year from a very large crowd which was uncontrolled, with an enormous amount of glass and bottles and rubbish in the park that we had to pay to remove.
The scheme would in fact be a financial bonanza for the council. Similar to the Matara Festival, the area would be cordoned off and people would be charged admission, possibly as much as $20. Council would receive 15% of the gate and a percentage of the turnover from the brewery.
The public, if they wish to go to the foreshore and enjoy, incidentally, the fireworks display that will be there, they can go anywhere else along the foreshore. There'll be plenty of space for everybody.
Newcastle promoter Peter Anderson today confirmed he was involved with the proposal, but said it was early days as far as planning was concerned. He said no band had yet been contacted about the venture and that the price of admission would depend on who was eventually booked to play. Bruce Mackenzie, NBN News.
Many of the 300 students who walked out of the second-year nursing practice exam 3 weeks ago were confused and angry, complaining of apparent ambiguities in the paper and constant disruptions. The faculty held a review to see if there were mistakes in the paper.
There was no evidence found that any student had been disadvantaged by the content of the questions. There were, in fact, 6 questions that were the subject of complaint. On one of them, 99% of the students answered it correctly anyway.
While the paper itself was given full marks, the faculty decided after consultation with students that performances could have been affected by confusion in the exam room.
The real question then became one of disturbance in the exam room rather than the content of the questions itself.
The faculty has sent out letters to the students explaining that those who failed the exam could sit it again on January the 8th. Despite the furore, Mr. Minor says only a small percentage would need to take the test again.
Nichols didn't make it past the second round last year, but 1991 has been his year. Surviving a couple of tough three-setters, including a 1-6, 7-5, 6-2 win over Jamie Holmes in the semi-final, Nichols met Queenslander Andrew Kratzmann in the decider after he had disposed of the number 1 seed Jason Karsk in the second semi. But from the beginning of the final, Nichols was in total control, displaying a fine temperament along with consistent ground strokes, and he took the first set 6-4. The second set was a lot closer, with Kratzmann's game improving with every point. Nothing separated the players at the end of 12 games, and in the all-important tiebreak, Nichols prevailed to wrap up the match in straight sets 6-4, 7-6, clinching the tiebreak 7 points to 5. Devotees of different styles of martial arts took part in the Australian Kashiki Contact Karate Championships, with competitors from every state trying their hardest to gain a national crown. Kata was the first competition where each contestant must show a set of movements with sharpness and balance, and the youngsters were in top form. But the main part of the event was the full contact fighting, and when a major championship is on the line, don't hold back, go for it. Up for grabs with some good performances will be places in the Australian team for the next international competition. At Cessnock, some of the biggest names and frames in the rugby league world took to playing golf, all for charity. A couple of stars such as Balmain's Paul Sirenen really wound up to the challenge and displayed solid technique, while the likely lads from Manly, Cliff Lyons and David Hosking, found the demanding layout a little tougher. But then again, some ability may be needed. For Big Artie, the exercise of 18 holes never goes astray as he prepares for a season with the Sharks. But I suppose if you're the coach, why work too hard? Take a ride. That's if you can fit Artie. While Royce may still be celebrating the Panthers' grand final win. The big winner was charity and the Cessnock Rugby League Club. And at Maitland, the annual 10-over cricket competition got underway a little late this morning owing to overnight rain. But that didn't dull the enthusiasm for combat in the middle. 88 teams took part in the event, with the final still underway. The boys from Scone showed some amazing fielding ability. Peter Fleming a sensational catch. And then he brought it all undone, dropping an absolute sitter. Others just threw everything into their work, including their bats. Touch football is one of the most popular and competitive sports on the eastern seaboard. 4,500 players and officials came from every region. In all, 600 matches were played during the 3 days of the carnival. And triumph for a group of fleet-footed females from Wallsend, the over-30s, as they outplayed their opponents in their grand final. From the opening moments, Wallsend displayed plenty of pace and flair, and it wasn't long before they cracked the Port Macquarie line to bring up try number 1. Wallsend continued to apply the pressure and again raced away to a handy 2-0 lead. From then on it was one-way traffic and Wallsend were never in danger of losing their final, running in another 4 tries to seal the match 6-0. And the emotion of winning a state title overflowed, with few dry eyes among the coaches and supporters, let alone the players.
The intensity of the fire destroyed any hope police had of gathering scientific evidence of how the blaze started. It's thought to have broken out in a lounge room with an open fireplace and to have spread through the ceiling to the remainder of the 80-year-old building, which was converted to a hostel for people with alcohol-related brain damage. The inquest at Dungog is now leaning heavily on eyewitness accounts of the hours leading up to the fire. They've told Coroner Kevin Waller that the 40 residents were left with minimal supervision overnight. Smoking in bed was discouraged but not rigidly prevented. There are conflicting reports of logs being carried still smouldering from one fireplace or stove to another, and there was even a report of a small fire breaking out when a rat gnawed through a power line. But residents rarely agreed on the details of any one incident. While the survivors were able to give graphic accounts of their escape from the blazing building, few, if any, could account for their movements or the movements of others prior to the blaze, or even give a reliable time as to when the fire broke out. Police identified 3 residents who they said may have a knowledge of how the fire started. Among them, schizophrenic Buck Skinner, who claimed to have overheard another resident threatening to burn the hostel down after caretakers cut his cigarette ration for smoking in bed. That man, Doug Fenton, perished in the fire. Another resident, Dallas Parson, admitted to once having lit a fire in his room to heat a cup of tea. One of the final residents to give evidence was also the most sensational. Barry Brooks claims to have served 3 years at Morisset Hospital for setting his wife's house alight in the mid-70s. He also said he'd been present at 4 other serious fires in the Newcastle area but had nothing to do with them. Mr Brooks claims took a bizarre twist when he said he'd also served time for attempting to murder his wife with 2 rifles and 4 hand grenades. Coroner Kevin Waller observed there was no record of either the offence or the trial concerning the matter. The inquest will resume tomorrow. Tom Hilston, NBN News.
Sam Laguza turned 50 in May of this year, and to celebrate, he's been on a rampage of New South Wales bowling trophies, culminating in being named the state's top bowler for 1991. While receiving acupuncture for a troublesome tennis elbow today, the Cohiba Club bowler reflected on his award.
I think it's great satisfaction to do well in New South Wales or in Australia as a bowler. So many bowlers, and it's great. I think it's a great honour especially to get picked the bowler of the year.
Laguza's bag of titles this year includes the State Fours Championship, the State #1 pennant flag with his club Cohiba, wins in the Peter O'Neill Memorial Classic at East Cessnock, the invitation singles at Park Beach and Halekulani on the Central Coast, and runner-up trophies at Port Macquarie, Warilla and in Newcastle in singles and pairs. Along the way he represented New South Wales for the 76th time, but his fondest memory this year was in a teams event.
I think the #1 state pennant was great. I've been runners-up and I was very disappointed, and I think it's great to win.
With this success, Laguza has been invited to Coolangatta for their big event, and he also has received numerous other invitations. Hampered in the latter part of the year with his injury, Sam hopes it won't be long before he's back on the greens.
Well, I don't play much tennis, but it happened to all of us. It's just one of those things that happens, and you just got to take care of it. It takes a long while to get rid of it. I hope I'll get back to bowl soon and try hard and get back to it.
There's not much chance for trains to miss the stop at Beresfield. An electric blue paint job gives it an eye-catching look.
They can see it in the dark. I think it could have been something more complimentary to the region.
It's certainly been a talking point in Beresfield. Some commuters are forced to wear sunglasses to stop the glare. Others have decided to try and fit in with its bold look. The station master is the man to blame. He chose the colour scheme, but admits it looked a lot tamer on paper. State Rail says it isn't the look for the future. The experience at Beresfield has warned them to stick with heritage colours in the years ahead. For 2 days, the Hornet fighters of RAF-based Williamtown's 77 Squadron have been flying the closest thing to a real mission they'll ever experience without going to war. While the pilots are familiar with simulated combat, they only occasionally use live weapons and then on a selective basis. For the first time, they're flying a fully armed Hornet. The weapons include 500 rounds of ammunition, 4 500-pound bombs, 2 computer-guided Sparrow missiles and 2 heat-seeking Sidewinder missiles. The first target is an airborne one. It's out of visible range, but from the pilot's cockpit, the first missile passes by, relaying information about the target. The second is then launched for the kill. The Hornets head on to their next target, an army tank at Singleton Army Base firing range. A spotter aircraft goes in, dropping marker flares to guide in the warplanes. Then it's the turn of the Hornets, dropping decoy flares designed to throw off heat-seeking enemy missiles. That was an expensive near miss, but as the Air Force points out, it is a training exercise and hopefully practice makes perfect. Tom Hilston, NBN News. The arrival of the 30-ton submarine section from Adelaide marks the eagerly sought return of shipbuilding to Newcastle. The former Carrington Slipways site, which folded 12 months ago, is now owned by the Australian Submarine Corporation. Over the next 3.5 years, up to 30 welders and fitters will work on a series of identical sections to be included in each of the Royal Australian Navy's 6 new Collins-class submarines. Turned on its side, the hull section is part of a complete 17-metre tail unit housing the submarine's electric engines. The remainder of the 75-metre submarine is also being constructed in sections at the corporation's headquarters in Adelaide. As work progresses, the Slipways will also build a midsection housing the escape tower. Site manager Keith Lynch says each of the 150-ton hull sections completed at Tomago will be virtually a complete slice of the whole sub.
Well, it'll be a stern section of the submarine. It'll be painted. The hot work will be done on it, so it'll be ready to receive components and installed down in Adelaide.
Although the project is on a much smaller scale than previous shipbuilding at Tomago, it's still an opportunity for the city to show off its expertise.
We've had tradesmen here now for almost 6 weeks. They've been having special training courses and testing to ensure that they are capable to do the work that's required on the submarine.
They're keen to get started?
Very keen.
Other components of the tail section will arrive over the next few days. Construction of the second submarine tail section will begin in June next year. Tom Hilston, NBN News.
The fury of Black Wednesday's fires and the potential for further disasters has forced bushfire brigades to turn to new tactics in the battle to gain control of fires early before they endanger lives and property. The bushfire brigades have already seen helicopters waterbombing spot fires, and they're convinced they have a role to play. Bushfire controllers invited local pilots to Cessnock Control Centre to get a detailed understanding of the availability of aircraft and their operational limits. While bushfire fighters agreed waterbombing had a place, the big question was, when does the risk to property justify the expense of aerial operations?
Mike Gibson's debut for the Breakers was one that will haunt him for years. A long throw rebounding to Damien Murray, and he slammed the shot behind Gibson. 3 minutes later, Murray latched on to a Warratifi cross, and it was number 2. Melbourne Croatia continued to attack, and Bitskic made a great solo run. The Breakers' defence fell apart, and all of a sudden it was 3-0, with Gibson again not able to grab hold of the ball. A Warratifi was brought down just outside the box, and Murray grabbed his hat-trick. If that wasn't enough, a Warratifi was again instrumental in setting up a golden opportunity, and Silic made no mistake, and it was one-way traffic. The second half didn't get any better. Northam's dreadful back pass easily picked off, and a Warratifi was given a gift goal, one he thoroughly deserved. And was it any wonder manager Bruce Stow was ropeable?
It will never, ever happen again. And if they can't apply themselves, I've just told them, they won't be out here in the future because there'll be somebody else taking their place.
Australia currently imports aluminium fluoride, an essential ingredient in the aluminium smelting process. The construction of the Kooragang plant will save the economy around $50 million in imported product. Locally, the plant will service both the Tomago and Alcan smelters. 3 months ago, a commission of inquiry into the development found it would have minimal impact on the environment, and the government has fast-tracked the proposal so that construction can begin by the middle of next year, with production underway by 1993. The plant will produce 45,000 tonnes of aluminium fluoride and will create 50 new jobs. It will be built in 2 stages, with the first costing around $45 million. Monitoring of emissions by the plant will be made available to the State Pollution Control Commission and Newcastle Council.